Your Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Naeed, Ministry of Finance for Egypt. We're going to have Mrs. Sigrid Kaag, Minister of Finance of the Netherlands, Mr. Noel Quinn, Chief Executive for HSBC, and Mrs. Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director, IMF, and Ms. Marie de Rome, Managing Director, Sovereign Risk Moody's. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the opportunity and the honor to moderate this panel. Let me briefly summarize a little bit what is the topic of the discussion here in this session. So, climate change poses enormous risk to our lives, the global economy, and the stability of the financial system. It also can have a material impact on the sustainability of public finances, particularly in emerging markets and the European economies. So, this country has a much smaller share of global green gas emissions, but most of them lack the resources to actually address this. The global economic outlook is darkening. There have been crisis after crisis, from COVID, from the war in Ukraine, from increases in energy prices, food prices, and central banks around the world to tackle inflation have increased obviously policy rates. That has resulted in tightening of financial conditions and makes access and cost of financing for emerging markets much higher than it was before the crisis. Obviously, those are not just risks, there are also opportunities. So green sustainable financing can offer opportunity for the private sector, but it's not enough at this point. If you look at annual flows into sustainability finance, it's only a small fraction of the trillions and trillions of needed to actually address climate risk. So what can be done to one, scale up the cost of scale up private finance? So public sector can't do it alone. We know that the public debt are higher, costs are higher, so we need private sector, we need to scale it up quickly. And also can be done to reduce the cost for emerging market and developing countries. So let me start with first question for Dr. Mohamed Naeed. Can you talk about Egypt's experience in issuing green financial instruments to reduce the cost of borrowing?
Thank you very much. And let me say that the Egypt experience was green financing, which we went through the green bond. We issued $750 million. We were the first in the Middle East and second in Africa. And we also went for green loan of $1.5 billion with a syndicate of 25 regional and international banks. And also we went to the private sector. Private sector also contributed to financing our green project. Let me say, with regard to the green bonds, to be honest, the market is not lowering the cost. And if we calculate it as an overall cost, green bond is more expensive than the Euro bond. Why? Because the amount of work required and the amount of technicalities before the issuance through the term of the bond, and a lot of work, a lot of communication, a lot of technical people and technical work. And also, if we look at, we need to hire a specialist for auditing, for reporting, and for all of that. As an overall, the cost was higher than the traditional Eurobond. So, let me say that if we want to ensure that there will be really a green bond market to encourage green financing through this instrument, so we have to think about standardizing some tools to ensure that green bond will be lower at a specific rate, at a specific standard in cost than the green, than the traditional Eurobond. However, let me say, our experience with a syndicate of 25 regional and international bank to secure $1.5 billion for green financing loan, it was excellent, because I think that they were understanding that it has to be a different cost, it has to be a different pricing. So it was fantastic experience, and we think that these banks played a good role. Private sector money, as we have seen last night with Mwafi, and how private sector can play a vital role in moving the green financing and advance this I believe this is very important, but again, we need to ensure that with this difficult time of not accessibility to the financial market, very high cost of financing that we will be offered by MPBs, by private sector, by the market if it is allowed a cheaper green finance. Thank you.
So going through this medicine, what has been the experience in the Netherlands in designing
بعدين عدوا النت هم حضرتك شيء شايفين عدوا حضرتك عدوا وكيف تعدي؟
Well, you may not expect it firsthand, but I think our experience has been very similar to Egypt. We issued green bonds. Of course, we are a country that has a AAA rating, so we can actually afford to take more risks, and we want to develop them further. But we have found new investors. We have found new entrants to the market that, because it's a Dutch green bond, are willing to go slightly further. And I think we need to figure out how we can leverage the advantage of countries with AAA rating to the benefit of emerging markets and developing economies. And perhaps that's also where the IMF can actually assist us. But the cost so far, we only gained a small financial advantage, but I personally think that this is something we have to be prepared to absorb and accept because we're investing in the future. And it's an important political and financial signal to the market. Equally so, we found that transparency, data, and comparability of data still remains an issue. So there's a case to apply dark green standards, and we need to allow regions to develop those. So we have intra-region comparability, or consider climate bond initiatives. So we want, through our green bonds, to also accelerate the private sector investors to go much further than the traditional remit. The points that the Minister of Finance of Egypt made, I wholeheartedly subscribe to. We need to develop the capacity. We need to ensure that systems can work this easier. We need to lower the transaction cost, but I'm quite confident we can do this. And as we will be heading into the co-chairpersonship by the Kingdom of the Netherlands of the Coalition of Ministers on Climate Finance, I want to really work on practical models, applications you can scale up to the benefit of all countries, dependent, of course, on their economic status, but that works for all, and you can really show the difference. Ultimately, it's also a matter of political will, also by private investors. If we're looking at the scale and impact of climate change, we're not 5 before 12, it is 5 past 12. If we're talking about financial risks, the significant risks we all incur due to climate change cannot be compared to the smaller financial risks they run in investing, in mitigating or dealing with bonds that deal with climate adaptation. So I think it's now or never. Thanks.
Thank you. Managing Director, so what can be done more to lower the cost of climate finance for emerging markets? In particular, what an institution like the IMF do to lower the cost and scale up climate finance?
I'm so glad to see the room full. This is a very important conversation. How we can pragmatically move from where we are today, which is not the best of places, to where we must be. And I want to make 3 points. Number 1, if we are to see more green investments in emerging markets and developing economies, we first have to improve the investment climate for investment, period. We know that money is more willing to go to places where there is a clear regulatory framework, where there is predictability of policies. They are not going to change over time so much that make investments sink. And this is an area, traditional area for the IMF to engage with our members to make sure that they do have institutions and policies that make them attractive to investment so they can benefit more broadly of tapping capital. But then comes the green field, and there, right now, it is a very sad story. Sad for the world as a whole, because the total climate investments globally, 630 billion, and we need probably 5 times as much we need just 1 trillion for developing markets, emerging economies. And out of this 630 billion, today they're capturing a minuscule part. I mean, we can argue is it 5% or 7%, but it is small. So then obviously this picture we have to change with speed. And therefore we have to be intellectually honest. To achieve speed, the first thing we need to do is to recognize that some reduction of risk for private investors, in other words, green subsidy, is necessary. And we have to get off our ideological high horses. We are not going to get fast movement of money unless green investments are made more competitive on the basis of risk for private investors, all other things equal, is lower. Whether this is done through equity investment or first loss guarantee, we have to accept that this is a necessity. The fund, we are coming with the new Resilience and Sustainability Trust. One of the main objectives we set for ourselves is to facilitate, with the presence of the fund, good policies, and also to make sure that we encourage private capital to flow into emerging markets. And the third point I want to make is that we do have to generate globally and for emerging markets green premium. We have to make it so that green is lovely. That can only happen if we have the courage to make high carbon intensity unattractive. And we know the path is called pricing carbon. Unless carbon is priced on a predictable level with price going up, we are not putting a disincentive that can make greenium a reality. I can say, look, I can talk for hours here, but we have fabulous panelists, so let's keep going.
So we heard from finance-based international institution. I think it's time to hear from the private sector side. So what is your perspective in terms of what the private sector can do to scale up private finance, reduce costs, and in the end, this is only going to work if public sector and private sector work together. So what can be done to improve that?
So let me first of all go back on the Minister's comments on green bonds, and I think a couple of comments on that. If green bonds become the norm, and they become a recurring theme, then I think the overall cost will go down through familiarity and awareness. Once the principles have been established, the disclosure methodologies have been established on that first green bond, I think there'll be synergistic costs emerge on bond number 2 and bond number 3 and bond number 4. In terms of bringing the overall cost down, I absolutely agree with the Minister. Disclosure is absolutely important. When you put the label green next to a bond, everyone wants reassurance that that combination of two words is legitimate. And I think the more the projects, governments, and the use cases of green bonds can be clearly identified with a database of substantiated information, I think the availability of green bonds and the pricing of green bonds will adjust based on the quality of the data that underpins the word green. So I believe, don't be discouraged by the first green bond. We're very grateful to have worked with you on it, and we believe there is strong potential for further bond issuance. If I step away from bonds now and I move more into project financing or initiatives where it's more bank debt, private equity, public sector debt, or public sector contribution, I agree absolutely with what the Managing Director said. The trick is to get actually leverage on public sector contribution. And if public sector contribution can go in at an equity level or a grant level, then the cost of the private sector equity and the cost of the private sector debt will come down. And that lower cost will be on the majority of the funding. So a small level of public sector contribution can achieve a materially significant reduction in the provision of the private sector debt. And coming back to it's 101 banking, but it's important. The combination of the combination of the different sources of funding is more important than any one source of funding. If you get the balance right on the deal structuring, that combination of deal structuring is important. The second thing is consistency of government policy. Because what private sector lenders and private sector investors are looking for is the ability of that project to survive multiple administrations. That the offtake agreement will survive, that the subsidy arrangements will survive. Now, Egypt has a good track record of consistency and predictability, but that public sector policy, the predictability of it and the consistency of it, would influence significantly the cost of funding of private sector debt. And then the third thing, which is always a challenge for international banks, is currency exposure. Now, I think the market can handle normal volatility of currency. So I don't think it's take all currency exposure off the table. But if we, with the MDBs or with the guarantors, collectively in the governments, can find a way to manage significant currency volatility, that too can lead to a significant reduction in the cost of the private sector debt. A couple of final comments, if I can. And this again is outside of bonds, this is more project financing. The vehicle used for the project can influence the cost of funding. If it's a special purpose vehicle, with all of the risk concentrated in that one legal entity, the likelihood is the cost will be higher than if that project is sitting alongside a portfolio of an existing legal entity with proven cash flows. So the choice of how you raise the money and where the project sits can influence, because you can leverage the credit covenant of the existing business model and the existing cash flows. So providing to the corporate, one of the national corporates, and embedding it within that architecture can lower the cost of debt. And then I think the final thing I would put in here is, for many of those corporates, they're not necessarily green, they're greening. So accepting it as a transition journey for a corporate that's moving off of today's technology base, which is carbon heavy, onto a different technology base, which is carbon light, and sort of not demonizing transition and only favoring green. The journey of moving from where they are to green is also an important attribute. And we've got to make funding available for companies to progressively green themselves. And they can probably do it with a cheaper cost of capital than a special purpose vehicle capital. Some of that.
You just reminded me something when you talked about green bonds coming from scale. Minister, if you look at the global picture, the good news is green bonds are shooting up from between 2020 and 2021, tripled in size. So we are now, 2021 we were about 250 billion. Today we are probably above 300 billion already. And on average, the cost of green bonds is actually lower by 50 bps. So there is a premium, but not for emerging markets, exactly because of the issue of data, standardization, and what we need to work with you is how we can create more collective capacity in emerging markets, so we don't have each country reinventing the same green bond wheel.
So in terms of we heard that we need to lower the cost of greening. I think the rating agency perspective here can be helpful. So what are the drivers of the cost that you actually factor in when you crisis, and also more generally, what can rating agency, how can they help?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, and I think I'll echo a lot of the points here. The first point I want to make is that as rating agency, we integrate the risk coming with climate and carbon transition risk, the physical climate risk in our ratings, because we do see that these factors really as likely to shape the sovereign's capacity to repay debt. I know this is the best way to mention it. I'll try to talk about I'll try to talk a bit louder. Okay. So that integration in our rating of these risks is is important for us. We see these as really considerations that absolutely need to be reflected in our ratings. Now, the cost of borrowing that we see for emerging markets, I think similar to the point that Ms. Plongeva was making, reflects credit risk in general. And so to address that cost of borrowing, one way or one set of measures to be taken is really to address credit risk in general, which can be done and which has been done. When we look at ratings for low-income and lower-middle-income countries over the last 20 years, we have found as many upgrades as downgrades. So these countries that saw an improvement in their credit standing have been able to take measures that strengthen their economy's competitiveness, that strengthen their institutions, that build buffers, financial buffers, to address the challenges of tomorrow. So I think there's a lot of inspiration to be drawn from these instances in the past. Applied to a climate world, climate policy decisions, we really look at the nature of the risks. And here I want to distinguish carbon transition from physical climate risk, because they do appeal to different policies for governments. On carbon transition, we rate a number of emerging market sovereigns that derive today more than 50% of their revenue from hydrocarbon, and even more of their foreign currency earnings. When we look a couple of decades from now, in the world moving towards net zero, then some of these sovereigns face very significant debt sustainability challenges. So the priority there is to diversify the revenue base, diversify the sources of exports in order to be ready for tomorrow. And there is now a window. Hydrocarbon prices are high, and that gives a window to these countries. On physical climate risk, we've engaged with sovereigns, with Egypt and other sovereigns for some time. What we see is that governments have a very good understanding of the risk ratings. That is clear. It is still far harder to translate that understanding of the risk into policies, into really climate adaptation plans. As we see these plans evolve, as we see these plans being articulated, then as rating agency what we're able to do is really look at the broader returns, the financial returns, but also the returns in terms of social stability, in terms of diversification, economic competitiveness. And that is really what will help shore up, mitigate this risk and shore up the credit standing. So, as I said, a broad range. I think if climate is set in a broad policy framework, then I think there's a lot that governments are very familiar with in terms of economic policy, social policy, as well as financial policy that can be going on.
So the role of NDBs, one on this guy is the role of NDBs. In particular, how can we use NDBs and donor money to scale up? What role can we play? As you mentioned, Mr. Quinn, about the need to lever up. So how can we use those NDBs to do that?
It's interesting because Christine and I just had this outside conversation that she knows our views and we share the same. I think the NDBs have a moral and financial responsibility, a de facto political responsibility to be much more risk engaging. And they can do it in many different ways. The conventional way of looking at the AAA rating, the sort of buffers you need to keep, I think, is not fit for this era and the type of challenges we face. We could always go down easily with same offers, best rating, but will perish. So I think the choice is a very different one. And I think there's different ways to basically target concessional and non-concessional resources. We think that the port that's aligned with Christina's point, use surplus resources to facilitate interest rate buy-downs. There are a number of interesting examples where IDBs have done so, and I think there's an example of the first ILX, Impact Loan Exchange. The IBRD has done that, but a lot more could be taking place, or rather should be taking place. Now is not the time to wait, and I think as a shareholder in an NDB, in many of the NDBs, we expect this of the NDBs. Sometimes politically, domestically, we can't move as fast as an NDB could actually pilot, try, and you have the role and the ability to work across regions. So you can provide proof of concept in developing economies, in emerging markets, and then task us as shareholders from advanced economies. Can you partner with me? Can you be the next investor? Can you share the risk? And we would be willing to do so. The IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust is another such example. But more people, more countries, so to speak, and investors need to step in. So NDBs, my open invitation with call to action would be embrace the risk, document the risk, share the data, provide the policy, but then call us to action. And as a heads up, when we take over the co-chairpersonship of the Coalition of Ministers of Finance on Climate Change, I will make this one of the clarion calls to action. I think it's unforgivable if we do not.
Dr. Mohamed, so what are the Egypt's proposal for MDs to lower the cost of green finance and overcome this obstacle?
Thank you very much, and I will take what Ms. Christina said about building capacity and the standardization of the process of issuing green, whether green bonds or green loans or green financing through the private sector. This is very critical and very important because most of many developing countries, our African continent countries, don't have this capacity. And when we try to do it for the first time, it took a lot of effort, and sometimes we did try, sometimes we were wrong. So let me say what I would like to mention, something which is, I believe was very important, is that there is a standardization which is called IGMA, which is a green bond principles. So when we try to issue the report, we started with the green financing framework and made all the arrangement and allocated fund to projects aligned, and we have to comply with IGMA bond principles, and the framework has to be revised by leading environmental research called VICO, and after that we have to hire an international consultant to review the report and to ensure to the investors that we achieved everything. So it was hassle. So what I'm trying to say, if we can really standardize the process, this will be important. Coming back to what the MDBs can do, I will mention one or two points. Number one, the issue of full or partial risk guarantee. I tried to issue a specific bond in one market, international market. They asked me for guarantee. So I went to two MDBs, international financial institutions. I want guarantee. They said, okay, but the liquidity available for you will be reduced by this amount of guarantee. I said, what? What is the point? So we need to encourage MDBs to make some effort about the issue of full or partial guarantee, and I believe that we found that 95% of MDBs, they only direct funding, and only 5% is for guarantees, whether it is full or partial. So this needs to be change it. This is number one. Number two, we found that those who will be given such a guarantee, they can borrow at an average cost lowered by 330 basis points. So you can help us with that. You can support us with that without giving us fund or financing. Give us some sort of guarantee so I can lower the cost of financing. So let me say that Christina mentioned green premium. Let me bring to your attention that the market has what is called Africa premium. When they penalize the African continent, when they go for the international market for money, why access to the African continent? It's because our situation. So if we compare two African countries with the same rate, the same circumstances, but this is African, this is an African premium, add to the cost. So you are making our life more difficult because we are African borrowing. We have to demolish this idea. We are the same rate, so we get relatively the same price. The capacity building and the regulatory and the policy technical support will be crucial for moving forward with green financing. It's an obstacle. Let me finish with this. We have a proposal which would like to focus on the sustainability sovereign debt hub that was proposed by UNICA during the ISP held in Cairo last September. This hub aims to scale performance-linked sovereign debt and reduce the cost of capital for developing nations and therefore enable scaled investment development. And we believe that if you would like, or we would like to encourage all attendant stakeholders to express their interest and channel any inquiry in the reducing cost of green and sustainable borrowing initiative by scanning the QR code available outside this hall. So this can be an initiative to get together and see how can we reduce the cost for financing or green financing for our developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Managing Director, from the perspective of international financial institution, the bank, what mechanism and financial instrument can be actually used to lower the cost for emerging markets?
Let me recognize that we have indeed been faced with this reality today that not only emerging markets, developing economies are faced with a very difficult situation with limited or zero buffers, but with investments moving to the US because of interest rates increase and the high cost of dollar, the expensive dollar, we do have an unusually difficult situation, not just for green financing, but for financing in these countries overall. If we zero in on green financing, there are three avenues that are some developed and some potentially significant. The first one is to get green bonds on scale on the basis of aggregating institutional capacity building support and aggregating the coming to markets of countries. So rather than individual bonds coming one by one, to think about lifting up emerging market presence and marketing it with the collective strength rather than with the strength of each and every country. It is already there, but we have to admit we have not done enough to support emerging markets. And I would really urge the World Bank, an institution with significant experience in green bond issuance, to take this to heart. In parentheses, and now I'm going to do a commercial from the World Bank. The World Bank has innovated the very first quality green bond in 2007 was issued by the World Bank. The very first carbon trade was done by the World Bank. So this is an institution truly skillful. We have to demand that they give this, spread the skills more broadly. Secondly, catastrophe bonds. We have seen really good progress in pooling resources to tap into markets. So if a catastrophe occurs, countries draw down from the insurance. Insurance instruments more broadly, in a world of more frequent climate disasters, are a must, and we have to work to develop them. And again, the World Bank has a catastrophic bond program for the Caribbean. All countries of the Caribbean clustered together on the strength of everybody. You reduce the risks. We can think of similar insurance for drought, related disasters, again clustering countries. And the third one is debt for climate swaps. The discussion here is now in earnest, and the IMF, we have done our own research, and we see potential that we do need to explore. But it would not be fair if we don't say that the really big opportunity for developing countries is in carbon offsets. If carbon offsets, including blue carbon, if they become an asset class that can be securitized and used to raise money, that would be a major source of financing for the developing world.
Thank you. So I have a few more questions for the private sector. Unfortunately, I know that some panelists have a hard stop at 12, so maybe starting with at the end. So if you had a magic wand, what would be your dream? How would you scale up private finance? What dream?
Magic wand. I'm going to go to the MDBs, and at the moment MDBs, most of them take vertical risk. They do the totality of the financing, all of the risk categories of the project. If I could wave a magic wand, I'd ask them to go horizontal, not vertical. Take risk categories onto their balance sheet, and then the private sector can do the other risk categories. The other thing, a second magic wand, is sharing data, because they have a knowledge of government policy in the countries within they operate in. They have a knowledge of projects that is not openly shared with the private sector. So if they're going to take horizontal risk, not totality, what they've got to do is release some of their data into the domain of the private sector, so the private sector can then risk assess the remainder of the risk. They're the two magic wands I'd ask for.
I'll continue on the data side, but the data going towards analysis, and which is getting the case studies, getting the examples demonstrating how what is money well spent. And I think that will help demonstrate the risks, demonstrate the opportunities, and that will help the investor communities and the asset rating agencies be able to really differentiate between the sound projects and the ones that can be strengthened.
The third magic wand would be sell some of their existing portfolio that's mature, free up capacity to do the next project. There are some are doing it, many are not yet, freeing up existing balance sheet capacity. They're holding on to the term debt all the way through post-development. So that would be the third magic wand.
Are we going for the magic wand story? I had given mine to him, so he waved 3. Look, if I were to have a magic wand, I would make the world move swiftly to adopting carbon price, to tax, to trade, to regulations. Because if we don't have it, ladies and gentlemen, we will not meet our Paris commitments. It is impossible to get investments to move on scale and with the speed necessary. So here I am, maybe big. Let's see what is going to happen. Sigrid has an even better magic wand.
No, I think we also need to be mindful in all the magic wands that we need to tackle the asymmetry of data, but we also need to create space for countries to catch up. So when you weigh risk, it needs to be a relative risk. The risk that the Netherlands runs is not the same that Egypt runs. So I think the private sector here also needs to be more forward-looking and not only look at the public sector, but also say what is the what is the public, what is the responsible form of business conduct and prepared to deal with risks. So it's a double whammy. That's also the magic one, because we can't do it without private sector finance. We are very limited. Thank you.
Let us work on creating a special market for green financing with all the tools. And this will be a specialized market which will include green bonds, green loans, green facilities from NDBs, and this unified international market with all the different tools for green financing can accelerate the transition to climate change, because it will have different tools, different mentality, different strategy to ensure the acceleration of green financing for green projects.
If all these dreams come true, I think we solved a big piece of the puzzle today. I want to thank the panelists for being here, and 12 exact we can end the panel. Thank you very much.